I appreciate everybody coming to High Noon Club this afternoon. Every High Noon Club meeting, most of us know we start out with the opening prayer and a pledge of allegiance to the American flag. I'm going to ask Army Ranger Chaplain, who's getting ready to eat a potato chip, and the state representative Paul Wesselhoff to do our opening prayer, and then we'll do our pledge of allegiance to the American flag up right here, right after the opening prayer. So, Paul, are you ready?
Let's bow our heads for prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day and the weather that we're experiencing. We ask that you bless our food and bless our fellowship with one another. I pray, Heavenly Father, today's meeting will be productive. And Father, we pray for those that are out there defending our freedom. Pray that you'll be with all of our troops where they're stationed. And I pray that you'll be with those World War II veterans in Washington, D.C. that want to see their memorial, and some of them are being prohibited. Heavenly Father, I just pray that you'll forgive our country for being so callous toward our veterans. I pray, Heavenly Father, everything we do today will honor your name, Jesus Christ, because that's in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This week, we're very blessed. One of our regular members, Representative Mike Reynolds, is going to talk about tax credits. Now, tax credits. How many people actually understand the tax credit system that we have in Oklahoma? Would you please raise your hand? Okay, we got two people here say that they're authority on tax credits. Now, I know one guy is an authority on it. Now, the other guy is probably about authority like I am. I didn't say who it was, and we'll just find out. We're going to challenge both of them later on. But anyway, Mike Reynolds, take the microphone and tell us about tax credits. And a lot of Q&A or whatever.
Well, my name's Mike, and I'm happy to do this today. I tried to get Representative Dane to come, and he, as you may know, his wife recently passed away, and he's been pretty busy, so he couldn't come. So last night I thought, well, I'll get another expert, one that's probably factually knows more than me, and that's our State Auditor, Gary Jones, and he's going to help me out. I'm going to start off with just a few facts, and then we'll let Gary go, and then we can ask questions. We can do whatever y'all want. The Constitution, I don't think, I was going to check this morning, but the computer, I've overloaded it with the things I'm trying to do, but I don't think we're going to find the word tax credit in the Constitution. I'm pretty sure we're not. But I do know this. Section 10, Article 15 of the Oklahoma Constitution says, the title is Pledge or Loan of Credit, Donation, and Exceptions. Paragraph A. Except as provided by this section, the credit of the state of Oklahoma shall not be given, pledged, or loaned to any individual, company, corporation, or association, municipality, or political subdivision of the state. Nor shall the state become an owner or stockholder, nor make any donation by gift, subscription to stock by tax, or otherwise to any company, association, or corporation. Well, that's pretty clear, and I'm sorry, if Paul had been here, we would have tried to set up the screen, and I would put that up for you.
Written by a Democrat.
But, well, no, it was actually written by populists. It's part of the Constitution, and it says, what it says is the state can't give away money. The legislature can't give money to a private individual, they can't give it to a company or whatever. It's crystal clear. Except, again, if we had the section up, with exceptions that are in the Constitution. Well, guess what? I ought to read the Constitution more often. Because I read the exceptions today. And Andrew, my attorney here, isn't going to want to hear this, but there is an exception in the Constitution. It's for Oklahoma Center for the Advancement of Science and Technology. Okay. Well, they thought enough of the Constitution that they got the public to adopt an amendment that said we can give basically up to 1% of the gross revenue of the state to the Oklahoma Center for Advancement of Science and Technology. With one caveat. it has to be done by a 2/3 vote. And Andrew's going to be sorry to hear that the budget this year that included that only passed with 51 votes. So we're going to see about getting you guys to sign up for another Key Tam initiative and tell them to get that money back from the Oklahoma City. And I'm sorry I didn't read that till this morning. You just learn all kinds of things when you read the Constitution. But I bet nobody else has read it at all.
I read it.
There you go. All right, well, that's one item. So we can't give away money, do we? Well, we had a study a couple of years ago. Gary, the auditor, was on it. Several other people on it. Chairman David Knight chaired the committee. We had one presenter tell us about the 1,000 jobs that the Oklahoma Edge Fund created. I don't know if this man actually spoke before the committee, but his name was Risser, R-I-S-S-E-R. He said the Edge Fund had created 1,000 jobs. Again, it was a tax credit program. Well, actually, they gave us a listing of the companies that the Edge Fund has ever interfaced with. And so I just sent the names of those companies to the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission. And they came back with the fact that there had actually, if you took all those companies, there was 6,537 people employed by those 14 companies. Now, does that mean that all 6,500 people got new jobs? Well, I don't think so. And let me tell you why. Because of those 6,537 jobs, 6,524 were jobs at the University of Oklahoma. So that left 13 jobs for the other 12 companies to have created with all their tax credits. Of those 13 jobs, there's only 4 companies that even reported any employees. And you got to figure they had to have at least one employee applying for the paperwork before they could create a job for another employee. So that would be a maximum of 9 jobs created on a fund that what was that governor's name? Brad Henry? Said we need to make Oklahoma the research capital of the plains, and we were going to put $1 billion in it, and we put several hundred million in it. So total waste of time, and total distortion of the facts by people that say what a great deal it is. The Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority, March 20th, 2008. On the same day, the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority accepted the resignation of J. Larry Nichols. Why did they accept his resignation? He was the chairman of the Urban Renewal Authority. On the same day they accepted his resignation, the commissioners authorized an invitation for proposals for the redevelopment of a key city block. Nichols, CEO of Devon Energy, has been associated with the authority for 2 decades, but stepped down since the company is vying for the Urban Renewal Authority land to build a new corporate headquarters. You know where the site is, I won't read that. What's interesting is it says, Devon has announced it would like to build possibly the tallest building in downtown over the next 4 years at an estimated cost of $350 to $400 million. Isn't that interesting? We were told it was $1 billion. They got $300 million in tax incentives. I think ultimately, I've heard that the building cost about $700 million. And last year we tried to run a special deal because, make it convoluted, so don't try to understand it too much. Basically, Devon had agreed in the contract to make up the difference in the amount of property tax that the tax increment district received. If the building had to be assessed for like $1 billion, and then the annual property tax would be, I'll make this up, $100,000. Well, they did the comps, and the building was only worth $750,000. That's because they built it very expensively. They cost a lot more. The problem is the property tax in that $750,000 only amounted to, again, I'm making up the number, but we'll say $70,000, a significant amount less than was going to be needed to pay out the bonds. So the chairman of the Oklahoma House Appropriations Committee got up and said, gosh, they're going to be a great corporate entity. And they have agreed to make up that difference And so we're going to set up an arrangement where they can pay the money in and take it as a charitable deduction. Well, guess what? They had to pay the money in anyway. So why should we set them up so they can take it as a charitable deduction? That was already in the contract. That's the kind of things that tax credits do. Another example. Over the years that I've been investigating these, my accountant has many clients that get the tax credits. I've got people from my church that get the tax credits. And so they get them, they can't believe them. Too good to be true. So they send them to him, the programs, the prospectus, and they say, is this real? And he sends them to me, and I say, yeah, it's real. Thank you for the document. And so I've got tons of prospectus, but I'll just read you, again, a couple sentences out of one. This was from a group called Scissortail. And if you look at the tax credit records, they receive tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably in tax credits. It's hard to know because a lot of them haven't been cashed yet. Tax benefits. The Oklahoma tax credits. The fund is expected to qualify for tax credits under the Business Incentive Tax Act based on the company's capital investments in portfolio companies. Yada, yada, yada. It is anticipated that purchasers of preferred units will receive tax credits in the amount of $2 for each dollar invested in the preferred units. So what they're saying is, you send us, the minimum investment is $100,000. If you think you want to cut out your Oklahoma income taxes, you got to start earning a lot more money, or anybody that's in that category, I got to meet you so I can ask you for a campaign contribution. But you have to invest at least $100,000. You put $100,000, give them $100,000, they will give you tax credits of $200,000 back. So it's just a straight 2-for-1 deal to reduce your Oklahoma income taxes. Another interesting one, I've got two more, then we'll probably turn it over to Gary. A lot of these tax credits are for venture capital. So I began looking at the companies that participated in them. Many of them are at the Presbyterian Health Foundation, the Research Triangle south of the Capitol, which, by the way, on Monday of this week, transferred title to the University of Oklahoma because they needed more research space. That's not what they needed. They're going broke financially, even though they're tax credit giveaway havens. So now the University of Oklahoma is taking and giving them $80 million to buy the property. And the legislature can't do a thing about it. Well, we could. They won't do a thing about it. We could take away the authority for the university and higher ed to make those ridiculous kinds of purchases. But two of the companies were owned by a couple of research. Most people think they're professors. They're not professors. They're research scientists that work for the University of Oklahoma. One is named Paul Weigel. I believe it's Paul. P.H. Weigel. The other is P.L. DeAngelis. These guys were being paid salaries, I believe up to $450,000 a year. And this is several years ago. By the University of Oklahoma as research scientists. Now what do? They go invent new cures. You'll see billboards around town. They're going to cure diabetes or cure this or cure that. And so while they're being paid a salary by the University of Oklahoma, they're also getting tax credits to build their company at the Presbyterian Health Foundation. Then they get college interns that come in. The state pays for their college interns. And then they also, what? If they invent something, they get to move it outside their company and market it someplace else, and the University of Oklahoma gets a royalty off of it. That's the kind of ridiculous giveaways we have. So folks, a tax credit. What is a tax credit really? Well, the Constitution is clear. We can't give money away. So a tax credit is just a clever way to give money away. We could not write a check to Hylos, one of the research companies. We couldn't write a check from the state treasury and say, here's $1 million for you guys to start your business. That's clearly unconstitutional. So instead what we do is we say, okay, if you start your company and you owe $1 million in taxes, then we'll waive those taxes. Well, that's probably unconstitutional too, but it's even worse than that. Obviously, most of those companies have no taxes for the first few years. So in many cases, we make transferable tax credits, which means Hylos receives those tax credits of $1 million, and then they go out and sell them to Scissortail or these other companies who then remarket them, and that's how you can get 2 for 1. Someone can get a $10 million tax credit and go sell it for $5 million. They got $5 million in the bank. What do they care? They had nothing without the credit. Now someone else has a tax credit worth $10 million. He can go out to his friends and say, look, if you'll give me 50 cents on the dollar, I'll sell them to you. He's got a $1 million room for commission and everything else. And so there are brokers. We had brokers testify at our hearing. One guy, I believe, from California came in. And I believe, Gary can correct me on this, but I believe that he testified against the programs. I do know one of the guys that talked about the film tax credits, which has been in the news a little bit lately. He testified about the credits. And after the meeting, I went up and asked him, I said, what do you think about these tax credits? You told us how they work and all that, but they just seem ridiculous. And you seem like a reasonable guy. He goes, well, they're crazy. Well, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't ask you in public. He said, I'm going to make my film where I'm going to make my film. It doesn't matter if we got the tax credits or not. So it's ridiculous. So unfortunately, sometimes we don't get to ask enough questions or whatever. The people that like the tax credits, and it's the reason that lowering our income tax rates in Oklahoma is stalled. Because the rich aren't paying any income taxes. So they won't put any of their money in to campaigns. In fact, they will work against legislators that want to reduce your taxes. They're not paying them. So why should they help us? Why should they put pressure? So that being said, I think I'll stop now and let Gary come address, and then we can do Q&A or whatever we want to do.
Yeah, let me ask you a question,
Okay.
because you lost me in this, what you said. Scissortail, explain exactly, is Scissortail a brokerage company? What do they actually do? What's their purpose?
That's a good question. What are they? The most you can find out about these kind of companies is you can go look up and find that they're LLCs, so you can't find out who the owners are, you can't find anything else about it. So Scissortail is a LLC that put out a prospectus, which my accountant got his hands on. There are others, the one that Argonaut. Now we know about that one because it was Solyndra. It was George Kaiser. It was that scandal. The Oklahoma venture capital company of Argonaut participated in the Solyndra scandal on the solar panels. So they're LLCs that they set up for every deal. They only exist as long as they target one set of tax credits. And they say, okay, we're going to raise $50 million, and that's going to get us $100 million worth of tax credits, but you don't really necessarily know who they are at all. You can speculate based on addresses of their business and stuff like that, but you can't tell.
Okay, go ahead, Gary. You're on. You got a very difficult job making us dummies in this room understand how this actually works.
Okay, as Representative Reynolds mentioned, I was on the task force. We listened, we had testimony for several weeks, I think about 10 different meetings that lasted all day. And so we had many people that came in. And for instance, these programs, and one of the things that we were extremely concerned about is these venture capital companies. What they would do, they would say, if you put so much money in for venture capital, and you could show that you had this money invested for venture capital, you would get a credit based on that amount. They may go borrow money and then turn around, in some cases, they would get a 20% credit or they would get a 30% credit. And most people think of tax credits, they think, okay, if I have a taxable liability and I get a tax credit, I can charge that credit against the tax. But when they made these transferable, what they did is they now created a marketable item that you could go sell. In some cases, it got to where there's so many of them, they were getting 50 cents on the dollar, as he mentioned. But what happened in a lot of cases, that those companies that had large tax liabilities would buy these credits, and the industry that really started buying the credits the most were the insurance industry. The insurance tax that they paid, most of that, a large portion of that, went into paying for pension plans. So when someone would come back and they'd have $100 million worth of tax credits, and they would go to these insurance companies and sell it to them for 90 cents on the dollar, then the insurance company would use that credit to pay their tax, which is money that didn't go into the retirement plans. So the firefighters and the police pension funds were left short, because the formula that was used to figure how much to fund the pension plans, that was built into it. But one of the things we really concentrate on, let me give you an example. We in our office looked at one program. We do not receive any funding to look at anything like this. There's questions as to whether or not we have the legal authority to go look at these programs. So one of the things we talked about in this meeting, at the end of the meeting, we came back with recommendations. One of the recommendations is that we set up auditing, where we audit these applications to make sure that people are fulfilling the requirements necessary in order to get this credit. Because what they would do is they would prepare, in many cases, they would prepare a prospectus in order to get the credit, but there was no evidence that they ever followed through and did that. They would just get the credit. And so there was no one auditing the programs. And the tax commission had a very limited number of auditors. In fact, there's one individual who's an expert on it, but he was so overwhelmed he could only look at certain things. One of the recommendations was that we be allowed to audit the programs to make sure that people are meeting those requirements to say that they are indeed doing what they're supposed to in order to get the credit. The other thing was that we go back and we look at these individual programs, and we do a performance audit on these to determine, in the event that the legislature has authorized these, what are we actually getting out of it? Are we getting any true return for it? You know, if you have a credit that says, we're going to give you a credit for drilling for oil, and they come back and said it's increased the amount of oil production and ultimately, generated more revenue, then you can measure that. But nobody was doing that. So what we said was, we need to go through each one of these programs and go through and evaluate it and come back and see what type of return on their investment that the state of Oklahoma is getting. Every person on the committee, except for one, voted to have that be a recommendation. And the legislature, it came up in the legislature, what happened was Representative Dank had a bill that would actually set this up, and then the lobbyists flooded the committee meetings and got it killed. I mean, it looked like they had the votes, and they flooded the committee meetings and got it killed. We decided that we thought that we had the authority to look at these. We were not given the revenue. In fact, we don't get enough revenue to pay for auditing the tax commission. What we said is that we have a small reserve built on, based on the fact that we have increased our efficiency and gotten more work done and generated more revenue. So we went and looked at one of these programs. And what's amazing is, in the legislature, they have confidentiality clauses built in there that you cannot reveal who these people are. And so we looked at one program, and the one program was a venture capital program. And years ago, when they looked at it, there was only 2 companies that were qualified for this particular type of venture capital. One of the companies was actually a company that was quasi-owned by the state of Oklahoma, and they had not done very much of it. The other one was a company that was owned by a local car dealership that had made a lot of investments. They came back and said, we're going to grandfather that program in. We're not going to allow any more companies to be formed. But they allowed that one company to be sold. That company got sold to a large bank. Let me rephrase that. That company got sold to a LLC, limited liability company, whose members, or their owners, were officers in a large bank. And what it said in this particular program was that if the capital company participated in loans, they could get a 20% investment. But they did not define what participation was. The program was supposed to have ended in 2008. So when they filed their tax return in 2008, they had $18 million worth of tax credits that they were going to get that year. In 2010, they filed an amended report to say that they had $800 million worth of loans that would qualify for that, which give them an extra $160 million worth of tax credits. What it appeared they were doing is the only loans they were participating in were loans that that bank was making. So they would get 20%, and now, since I by law can't tell you which bank, now there's only one company, and when you go through this, you can figure out which one it is. In fact, the Oklahoma came back, and when they did the article, they said, well, based on this and this, it must be this company and this bank. And I said, well, you figured it out, haven't you? But I have not named you the names. But because of those companies, that particular case, the last I heard, it was still in court because they were trying to deny it because it was filed late. But they were claiming that they got the approval of that, but they would get $160 million worth of credits. And there is no recourse on those loans. If those loans went bad, then the company that got the 20% credit does not have to pay anything. All they did was fill out a piece of paper, a 3-page piece of paper saying they were participating in the loans. And in most cases, and maybe all cases, but all the ones we looked at, the people getting the loan did not even know that their loan was being used to participate with it. So, but I will tell you that the one thing that you can look at these, you go back and you look at the authors of the bills and the ones that are defending this program the most, you can go back and look and followthemoney.org and look at campaign contributions, and there's a direct correlation between the people that are supporting the bills, writing the bills, and voting against doing away with them, or even voting of having any type of scrutiny. You know, we were talking about transparency and accountability. When we talked about having these programs, the argument was that given the auditor, the resources to audit these is growing government, and it's not necessary because the tax commission and the legislature can audit these themselves. Tax commission, number one, they're not in a position to do that. The other is the same people that are arguing that the legislature can do it are the ones that have created the programs. So it's that, and that's just an example of one company and one program. It's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Let me turn it on. Let me jump in here. Gary didn't say this, okay? I'm saying this, okay? The company that that's taught me to discuss is Bob Howard Auto Group. The bank is Bank of Oklahoma, George Kaiser. Just so you all know, okay? So we actually have, nobody sitting there, nobody from the microphone said that. I'm the one that made that comment. So you have Bob Howard Auto Group and the Bank of Oklahoma, George Kaiser out of Tulsa. So you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in tax credits. Okay, now, what was the name of that website you talked about? .org?
Yeah, follow the money.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah,
So,
well, in fact, several of you know, and probably the majority of you know, that years ago I had uncovered a scandal that involved the former state auditor and Gene Stipe and his partners. And basically, the way I uncovered it was through Google and putting a combination of names together, and things would pop up, and then it ended up directing me to this website called Follow the Money. And once you've got to follow the money, you start looking at patterns and trends, then you realize where it all came together. I will tell you that neither confirming nor denying, I would tell you that there's a different LLC associated with what you were talking about now, but the other one was the former company that sold out. But there's a different LLC that was set up afterwards.
and let me do this too.
And I didn't even know the name of the auditor.
And I apologize to you about this, okay?
Sure.
Sometimes people come into this room and we know one another we've got such long relations, so I kind of forget who I'm actually talking to, okay? And we need to always remember this, okay? Here is our Oklahoma State Auditor, Gary Jones, our State Auditor. he actually knows. He at one time, before his job as a state auditor, he was the chairman of the Oklahoma Republican Party, the GOP. So again, we're talking to somebody that actually knows some stuff here. You're not just talking about a name, you're talking about somebody in authority, and we need to kind of remember these kind of things, okay? This is not some scandalous, crazy idea that somebody just running off here just talking about stuff. This guy actually knows, okay? So Gary, I appreciate you very much talking about this today, and I appreciate the same with Mike Reynolds. I mean, somebody that actually does it.
And let me say this, the stance that the committee took was that there were certain types of tax credits that people could make an argument that they indeed did create jobs. And what we said was that what we're facing right now, if we have these other things that are not anything but filing paperwork and getting money, that I said they put these other things at risk. I said, when you can sit there and you can look, and what we said was that we need to be able to see if the state of Oklahoma determined that they were going to make an investment, and like we said earlier, whether you write a check or whether you allow somebody not to pay a bill, it's still an investment that the Oklahoma is making by allowing those things to happen. And what we said is that you ought to be able to measure that and get the true numbers out there so you can make a determination whether or not this was a good thing for the citizens of Oklahoma. And what got me is we have people that don't even want to do that. And part of that has to do with is you can hide these other things if you just say, hey, we're not going to look at any of it. And we continue like this. Some of our retirement plans would be in very good shape if we did not divert money away from them. And that's one of my pet peeves from people is that you go back and you look at what has happened to our retirement plans. It's not the employees that have caused the problem. It's not the employers, and it's not the pension plans that are doing the investments. It's the people that have gotten benefits that they did not earn, that they did not pay for, that the state did not pay for, but we voted out there to create these things where people get something for nothing, and we need to stop that.
Another thing you talked about that is really kind of dear to my heart and our way of thinking is most people in this room are going to be Republicans. We're going to be Republicans. And we've got kind of a fight going on within the party, not only in the state of Oklahoma, but nationally. And I think part of the grassroots part of the whole problem is we know that some of these Republicans are being funded by some of these groups like that. And we'll raise up what I'm going to say good candidates to run against office, but we've got this huge power supply of money floating to candidates or Republican candidates that are killing us, and they'll make these people look like they're the most awful citizen that ever was, i.e. Paul Blair. That's the one I'm going to kind of focus on, that kind of deal. Where you've got the chamber and some of these big powers will come against these people. Previously, they wanted Paul Blair to run for the mayor of Edmond, but after he ran against Senator Clark Jolly, they now vilified him in such a way that even Jesus would look like the devil.
Well, let me, if you don't mind, let me tell that story I told you earlier. I was a county commissioner back in 1996, and we had Wackenhut Prison that wanted to put a private prison in rural Comanche County. And the district it was going in, the commissioner did not want it because the people in that area didn't want it. So he's going to vote no. We had a commissioner that did not have any rural areas, and whatever the Chamber of Commerce wanted him to do, he was going to do. So he was an automatic yes vote. So I'm the deciding vote on this issue. And as I go through and analyze the issue, I go, okay, if it goes there, then Lawton's going to have to provide the sewer, the water, the police protection, the fire protection. County's going to have to build roads to it. So I'm analyzing this on a Monday afternoon. We have a vote scheduled for 2 o'clock on Wednesday. I called the president of Wackenhut and I said, Wayne, his name's Wayne Calabrese. I said, Wayne, what if Lawton annexed this property? I said, to me it makes more sense because they're going to be responsible for all this. He said, well, that's okay, except we want you to approve it because if you approve it, we won't have to pay sales and use tax when we build it and furnish it. It'll save us about $2 million. Well, my thought was, well, it's going to cost us between the city and the county more than that to get all the utilities and the infrastructure to it. So I called the city manager and said, his name's Wayne Shumpert. I said, Gil Shumpert. I said, Gil, what would it take for Lawton to annex that property? He said, a request of the landowner and a vote of the council. I said, how long would that take? And he said, well, it just so happens that we've got a council member that's called a special meeting at 4 o'clock on Wednesday after your meeting. If you guys vote no, they're gonna vote yes. I said, well, put me down for a no vote then. The next day on Tuesday, I get a call from a lady representing the Chamber of Commerce. She said, Gary, we really need you to vote yes on that project. I said, Pat, I can't do it. She said, tell you what we're willing to do. We have a chamber meeting. If you'll vote yes, we'll fund your entire reelection campaign up to $45. And I said, Pat, I can't do that. She said, it's legal. We've got 40 people to give you $1,000. Well, actually, it's not legal. It's called bungling. But they think that they did that. And I said, I can't do that. So the next day when I voted, I knew that it would mean I would probably get beat. And sure enough, we voted no, they voted yes, prison came, everything got done, just like we said, except the difference was they paid $2 million and helped pay for the infrastructure, where before the citizens would have had to pay for that. They ran candidate against me and spent $52,000. The most that ever been spent in the county commissioner rate before that was $18,000, and that was what my opponent spent when I spent $4 in meeting by wearing out shoes. But I told Bob, I said, you know what? I lost 51 to 49, and people have asked me and said, would you do it differently? I said, no. But because of that, I made a decision that I was going to go back and look and see how many hours I'd like to get my CPA exam. I was 1 hour short after 20 years. And I said, in fact, there was no OU football game. My brother was there, and he was a CPA. He was sitting next to me. I said, I'm a dang mind to go back and try to get my CPA, and if I get it, I'm going to run for state auditor. I studied, I went and took that course, studied, and the 4 hardest tests I've ever taken in my life, and I got my CPA. And if it wasn't for that vote I took, I would have never done that. So, you know. It's absolutely amazing to me how we make decisions based on how they help individual people based on campaign contributions, instead of looking at the overall good for the entire citizens. So, I'm sorry.
No, good. That's the kind of thing we need to hear, because here's why I say this for the room. We need to change. I mean, the GOP has got to change, okay? Because we know nationally and also within the state of Oklahoma, there's a huge internal fight. But it's about a certain principle. Now, both sides are going to say they've got the principle. But whenever money or campaign contributions makes the principle, that's where we're going to fail, when we're going to continually to fail. So I appreciate that story, Gary, and I'm very proud that I can call you my friend. Okay, question?
My name's Mike, Gary. Can you give us any kind of an idea about what you might estimate that you or Mike, what the tax credits are that the state is giving away that we're losing in revenue to the state?
I would say over the last decade, it's in the billions. I mean, I would truly believe it's in the billions.
I actually did an analysis about 3 years ago with all the available information, and I believe that based on spreadsheets that the tax commission gave me, that the liabilities were $2.4 billion outstanding 2 years ago, that are just sitting there waiting to be collected when people, but because that's a problem. They haven't shown up yet because they can't use them all. So 5 years from now, they're going to be using them. 8 years from now, they're going to be using them.
But another thing though, you don't know who's entitled to them either, right? That's a secret. I mean,
and this is one of the things we discussed in our meetings too, and I'm glad you brought that up, is used to, they had a time limit on them. They would say that you have to use them within 10 years, 5 years. They removed that. And so we have this liability out there that we owe, but they haven't kept track of it, so we don't know who we owe it to and how much it is.
Now, how many people in business would like, now, people in this room that have your own business, how would you like to be in that situation? You know you've got a liability, but you just don't know how much it is. But it's fixing to come against you one of these days.
Well, and it's like whenever we had a shortfall, they voted to have a moratorium on tax credits. You can't take a bill that you owe today and defer it to a future year. An obligation that has been, incurred in state constitution has an obligation that is incurred within a particular year. You're obliged to pay for it during that year. And, even if you enter into a contract, you have to have that money set aside that year. And we talk about a balanced budget. When you go back and look and see that we have these obligations out there and they haven't been accounted for, we haven't balanced our budget each year, any year that we incur an additional debt that we haven't paid.
Question?
My name is Jim. I have a question concerning tax credits. You used the term plural many times. Do you know how many tax credits there are? And are these only for state tax liability, or can lower levels, county or cities, also get tax credits? Also, if you could perhaps speak to the difference between tax credit and versus tax exemptions in the availability and the value of either one of those.
Okay, first of all, a tax exemption would be if you have a particular item, say for instance, your taxable income is $10,000 and you have a $1,000 exemption, you would pay taxes on $9,000. A tax credit is once you figure out what your tax liability is. For instance, you owe $1,000 in taxes that you have to pay on that $10,000. The $1,000 credit goes directly against that tax that you owe. So it's not like a deduction. It is an actual one-for-one, you know.
It's more beneficial.
Tremendously more beneficial.
And the number?
As far as the number, I couldn't tell you how many different ones. Mike may have a better idea of that. And I really couldn't get into the, now, you get into, on a local basis, you get into some of these tax increment districts and things like that. So there's several different local programs, but I'm not really that familiar with those.
Well, I don't think there's, I mean, we don't really pay county taxes other than property taxes and sales taxes or whatever. So there aren't any credit programs there. The credits are always basically against income taxes. That's where they're going.
There are property tax credits.
Well, there are some property tax credits, okay. But what was the second part of that question? Because I had an answer for you. Oh, how many? It's published on the Tax Commission website. I couldn't tell you, but the problem is, what people don't understand, it's the amount of credits that were taken that year. And so it's so deceptive because you look 2 or 3 years ago, we've been saying, hey, we've accumulated $1 billion in tax credits and it'll show 10 million. That's because the people weren't making enough money that they needed the credits. So they're out there as outstanding. But there's a list of hundreds of them. And last year the legislature actually did the right thing and they got rid of several that were, you know, like a tax credit for waxing your floor or whatever. I don't know, you know. I mean, all the non-consequential ones, but there's probably 5 or 6 that are the most significant. We haven't touched those.
Well, another thing, the one that really kind of hit the fan here 2 or 3 years ago was the tax credits for these electric vehicles, for these golf carts. That was a huge one. I mean, huge.
Yeah, I mean, basically they have credit programs that between the state and the federal government, you virtually got free vehicles.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the ad valorem tax, there are programs where you can apply and get a 5-year abatement on your tax, your property taxes. Now, that is paid for by a state fund. So if a company comes in, they qualify for this, then what happens is they don't have to pay their income taxes, but the state pays it on their behalf. And of course, what's happened is there's been so many of them that have gone out there and qualified for it, they've eaten up the state fund, there's not enough money to pay them, so some of them are in arrears.
Explain a company have more than
Okay,
one.
well, what that says is that if I come in and I'm gonna build something here and you qualify, that you won't have to pay your taxes for 5 years, we're gonna suspend your taxes for 5 years. However, the state of Oklahoma will pay that on behalf, so the schools and the county get the money.
The subsidy type.
The subsidy.
My question is, can a company have more than one tax exemption?
Absolutely. They can go through and look at each individual program and see if they qualify under that, so they can have multiple exemptions.
Question.
Name's John. Approximately what's the fundedness level of our pensions and what would it be if it had not been for those tax credits? What tax differences are there?
You'd have to look at each individual one. We have, I think firefighters is in the mid-60s. The estimate, it would be in the 80s if those tax credits, if that money had come in and been invested. What I mentioned before about people getting retirement benefits that are entitled to, that's primarily the OPR system. If that money was not given to people that should have not gotten it and stayed in the system, OPRs would go from 80% funded to somewhere between 100 and 110% funded.
You know, let's think about this too, I mean, for the group, okay? Whenever they're given these monies, a revenue stream away for Oklahoma, the chance of us getting to a zero income tax is not gonna happen. I mean, it's just not gonna happen, because they're giving away the tax base. I mean, that's the simple answer to this whole thing. Okay,
Let me do a quick follow-up. Gary mentioned the tax credit that's on insurance taxes. That one really is what kind of blew the whole system apart, because guess what? It is not confidential. Tax records are confidential, insurance commission records aren't confidential. Jonathan Small, our good friend, went to work at the insurance commission. He spotted those and let me know, first time we were ever able publicly to determine actual people that were getting the tax credits.
question.
I'm Steve. You asked the question of how many people know about tax credits, and I raised my hand because, as a pastor, a few years back, we were going to build a retirement center over next to our church, and so I was approached about doing it with tax credits. So basically, I had a person come to us and talk to our church about how to go about getting these tax credits. The first thing that I learned is that this person that was going to help us get these tax credits, it was going to cost us $40,000. We'd have to pay $40,000 first, and that money could not come out of the tax credits themselves. So as I got to looking into this and realizing that, wait a minute, I'm getting the government here involved with our church and what we're trying to do here, I thought, no, this isn't a good deal. But we have several organizations or several ministries going on in Oklahoma City that are there because of tax credits, just like the Pershing Center that's over on Villa and Pershing, basically funded by tax credits. There's another retirement center, a black pastor, Pastor Young, out on 50th, Northeast 50th, built a huge retirement center out there by his church. Did it all with tax credits. So it's not just business, it's not just companies like we've been talking about here, but and so then when you think in terms of, well, these people do a lot of good, and they do good, a lot of good. These people are my friend. Of course, I didn't agree with the idea of using tax credits myself because I thought that was in violation of my own conscience. But anyway, my question about that is these kinds of groups, like the Pershing Center, they can give tax, or they can give tax credit, or not tax credit. When a person gives to donates to them, those people can use that on their taxes. So why the tax credit thing versus
that's different though. Let me tell you how that's different.
Okay, what is the difference?
The difference there
tax
is what
credits?
you're talking about a tax deductible donation. What happens there is, for instance, I'm working on a project right now to restore Quanah Parker's Star House. You know, and what you do is if you have a nonprofit status, then if somebody makes a donation to that particular project, then their donation can come off of their taxes. And if they have a $100,000 income, it comes off their income. So they have a $100,000 income, they donate $10,000, then they can take $10,000 off of their taxes and it lowers it down to $90,000. Then they pay taxes on the $90,000. What we're talking about is I owe $100,000, my taxes end up being $14,000. If I get a $14,000 tax credit, I could wipe off that $14,000 and not have to pay it, pay zero taxes. So that's the difference between a credit and a tax deductible, item.
You kind of understand, I mean, if, like tithing, if you tithe, you can write that tithe off, but you don't get 2 for 1.
Right.
That's literally a tax credit. These guys are getting 2 for 1 write-offs, or they could be as high as a 9 to 1.
No, it's not,
It's a direct reduction of what they pay in taxes, not lowering the taxable obligation.
Question. Name, sir.
Paul, how far back does this go, Gary? How many years ago did this started to evolve?
most all of the evil programs like this in Oklahoma started in 1987. 1987, there was a joint House-Senate Economic Development Committee chaired by Don McCorkle, a sophomore member of the House of Representatives, who I'm told made $10 million off the system. He ran for the mayor of Tulsa 3 or 4 years ago. So most of the programs began in 1987 after the failure of the Penn Square Bank. Max Salyer was instrumental in that, our city councilman. And so, but although the programs began there then, most of them weren't implemented for like 8 or 10 years. The structure was set in place, but they weren't funded, they didn't have the money because of the Penn Square Bank, so the money started flowing much later for everything except the one that Gary mentioned anonymously earlier, which is obviously Bank of Oklahoma. I know that, I sat on the floor of the House of Representatives, and the subsidiary corporation is the Cottonwood Valley Venture LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bank of Oklahoma. That was set up after apparently the Bank of Oklahoma bought the program from Bob Howard Auto Malls.
Question.
92.
I've got two quick questions. Try to be quick. My name is Joe. Am I understanding this right? The whole purpose of these tax credits is to get investment into Oklahoma, but the purpose is fraudulent stuff is going on is because our legislators are taking kickbacks or getting, I mean, what is the purpose for that? I can see them coming back to you saying, hey, we'll fund your next election campaign. Is that why they're so popular and they're allowing these fraud to go on? And then my second question is probably toward Mike. Mike, I find this terribly obnoxious that they can sell these tax credits. They're basically negotiable instruments. Can we not get a bill passed saying that they will not be sold?
That was one of the recommendations, that we do away with transferable credits, but that bill got killed in committee. Representative Dank had that bill got killed in committee. And, you know, as far as transferable. You know, if it's not transferable, that means you have to have an income, you have to go out and done something to earn money that you create a taxable liability and charged against. Then you can measure that and say, well, you know what, they're doing some good. But when you do that and make them transferable, especially when you allow them to get a credit for not really doing anything but shuffling paper. You know, I mean, this one company has gotten hundreds of millions of dollars worth of credit for doing nothing but, quote, participating. In this case, their participation is nothing more than filling out some paperwork.
Question.
My name is Jean. So I'm observing, I'm listening, and I have the awareness that this is going to be on Facebook. This is going to reach, I don't know how many of these legislators' constituents. What would you have us do here at high noon? What would you have us do to try to encourage, inform, and get this out? Do you have legislation coming up that will alter this, correct it? We need some instruction as to what you would like for us to try to embrace and do.
Well, and I don't know whether or not there's legislation coming up right now. I will tell you that I would encourage Representative Dank to refile. Of course, I don't know if he can refile his bills or not, because there may be a 2-year rule. But anyway, those bills that Representative Dank authored that were a result of that task force need to be passed to put into place, which would say that these programs have to be looked at, they have to be evaluated, and they have to make determinations as to whether or not they're actually presenting producing anything that's beneficial to the citizens of Oklahoma. I mean, if you want to get something from the citizens of Oklahoma, you owe it to us to show you what you're doing and what you've done before you get that. I mean, that's common sense. But that's what needs to happen. We need to, because if somebody can come back and say, listen, I will do this, and they show you how they do it, then at least you can make a determination as to whether or not that was a worthwhile investment. The way it is now, you can't even tell that.
And I don't think that's too much to ask. I mean, really, if I'm gonna give you some money to do something, would it be too much for me to ask you would you please show me what you've actually done for this money? That's all I'm making a statement. I'm making a political statement with that question, okay? Being a business person, I want to know exactly how money's being spent. Question.
Hold on. I'm Andrew. Are tax credits retroactive, or can they be applied retroactively?
If you're asking, if you get a tax credit this year, can you apply it to a previous tax bill? Yes, you can, astoundingly.
You can get a refund?
Or even if you filed extensions, to make it simple.
I'm not familiar with that. So
Okay, question.
Can we name the people who voted against Dank's bill, who killed it? We need to know who those people were.
I'm sure we can find it. I don't know. The point is, Representative Dank did a great study. I disagree with him on one major area of tax credits, but that's all right. We agree on the others. But the problem is, Representative Dank was, I hate to use the word naive because he's a pretty sharp guy, but I will say that for lack of another word to think of right now. He was naive enough to think that the legislature was going to get on board because of the study we did, and he lumped all of it together in one bill. We need to come back with one bill at a time, and then we'll see if all the lobbyists that want to kill one credit will help each other lobbyist.
Question.
Do it with one bill at a time. It's kind of similar to log rolling. Then we're going to pass.
Question.
Mike, and what's going on, Mike? A little bit of state issue clarification, everybody, is whenever the bill comes out of committee, it still has to be scheduled through calendar committee. And you want to talk about a place where, you know, bills can die, that's it. Right there is an unequal latitude in terms of membership hierarchy. If you're on calendar, you can kill off another person's bill, and there's nothing that individual can do about it. So you gotta understand, there's all these roadblocks. So it may get out of Dank's committee. It may not, but if it does, it still has to go to calendar, and then it still has to be cleared by the floor leader. And that's assuming that they're willing to do that. And as soon as that happens, then it's like, well, then you gotta deal with the Senate. So we realize that while we think these are great ideas, unfortunately lobbyists, you know, they control that ship in terms of what bills are actually gonna get heard.
Okay, now let me just kind of make this statement. Stay with me. Okay, now here, explain to everybody in the room exactly what you do, because some people in this room may not know what you actually do, because you speak of some kind of an authority, and I'd like for everybody to understand exactly what you actually do too.
Oh, yeah, I'm a colleague of Mike's. I'm state rep for Barnwell, part of Oklahoma City.
And here's our future right here. Okay, here's our future. So you speak it up. Okay. Thank
Exactly what the representative said. We had a bill that would allow us to do performance audits on state agencies on a rotating basis. It passed the committee in the House unanimously, passed the committee in the Senate unanimously, but finally got a vote on the very last day of the House, which means there's no way in the world, because it's died because time's run out.
The Senate's
Because the Senate's adjourned. And so, it went out for a poll, and 78% of Oklahomans were in favor of it. And officially, almost, I think it was one no vote on the floor of the House when it finally came up. But so they can say, well, I voted for it. Well, but they play these games and they fix it where you can't get them through.
Question.
My name is Woody. I'm kind of in agreement with Joe when we're labeling this misuse of the spirit and intent of these credits to call it a fraud. And I'm not afraid to call it a fraud. But if we took it to the court and tried to claim it was a fraud, they could show that it's still legal. We have to have a name that we can put on this. If we're going to bring this to the people, we're going to have something to call it. What do you recommend?
Woody, I don't know that they've actually been tested in court. And I know that it'd be very difficult for some attorney to take that on, because he'd be looking at, I mean, our Youth Expo, we're looking at 13 attorneys that fight against Andrew on a regular basis. You'd have 1,000 attorneys fighting against your attorney to try to get that through the court system.
What I'm talking about is something that could be brought before the people, that to show, to raise some public opinion against this.
Well, and one thing that may need to happen is this may be one of those issues that you need to put together an initiative petition and go out and get signatures from the people and put it on the vote of the people. Because if it gets so logjammed that it can't go through the process based on its merit, then maybe that might be something that needs to happen, is that let's go out and get the signatures of the people and then put a stop to it.
You know, another thing is we've got to be very careful what I want to say with words too, though, Woody. Okay, because here's why. It's not fraud. Okay, it's not fraud. We've got the intent of fraud. It may be very misleading, but fraud indicates a criminal activity that took place. Okay, it's not fraud. It was passed by the legislature. It goes through the legislative process, so it's not fraud. It's misleading, but it's not fraud.
Yeah, I understand that. But what we have to do is raise some public opinion against this in order to get something happen with it. And we need to put a title to it. It means we're going to call it something.
Let me make one statement toward that, Bob. If they put on paper they're going to do something to get this credit, but then they don't follow through and they still get the credit, that could be considered fraud.
Question?
I'm Sharon. When, if ever, do you think that we should have tax credits? If they prove to you that a company is valuable, they'll bring money into Oklahoma, would you favor a tax credit or never?
I will tell you that I think that what you need to do is look at those on an individual basis, and you need to measure, and if you look and see, like it or not, we are in a very competitive environment right now, because virtually every state has some type of credit program. But what we need to do is to say, okay, if we need to be able to measure and say, this is what you're gonna do, and this is the result we're gonna get, we need to be able to measure that and say, you know what, it's worth the investment. But the way it is now, we have no way of measuring that investment. And I will tell you, in my opinion, Mike may disagree, I think there are things that when we look at, that the determination from a business standpoint of in Oklahoma, we ought to definitely consider those and possibly approve those. But that's my opinion, but what bothers me is, I think that we have given out so many bad ones, that the ones that basically could justify themselves are ultimately probably gonna go away. You know, what's gonna happen, it's people are gonna come back and say, you know what? This whole thing is not worth what we're paying.
Okay, question.
Yeah.
Now again, your name and what you do, because some of these people may not in this room know what you actually do. Now, you're what?
Representative Lewis Moore, Northeast Oklahoma County. And I guess one of the things I would like to ask is, can we do a freedom of information request and find out some of the information that we're saying is so-called confidential?
No. It's in the open, that's why I mentioned earlier about Jonathan Small. Everything is contained within the Oklahoma Tax Commission, and those are by law confidential. And the only tax credits we've ever been able to identify then are the ones that the insurance industry was taking through the Oklahoma Insurance Commission, and that's how I finally got some of the names and principles in this stuff, because they're not protected by confidentiality.
Question.
Then, also, we haven't tested the constitutionality of some of these activities where we were stacking debt year after year after year, that's unconstitutional. That hasn't yet been tested, is that right?
I think most people don't even realize it's out there. One of the things we recommended was that there be an approval process by somebody other than the tax commission. So what you would say is you would come and apply for this particular thing, it would go through a process, and they would actually have to vote publicly as to whether or not these were approved. And that would be public and be transparent, as opposed to letting the tax commission handle it, and then they hide behind the tax code. And the confidence of the tax laws. Thank you very much.
Okay, question. One over here. Here, let me go here, and then there.
My name is Scott. So what you're saying is that there's no oversight on this to follow through to prove that the actual activity has been completed to get the tax credit?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and that was what we said. There needs to be a procedure there where you go back and audit to make sure that they have fulfilled the requirement, that they filled out the paperwork properly to be approved, that they follow through to do whatever activity they promised to do before they get that credit. That's not happening. And the other thing was, let's look at each individual program and do a performance audit to determine whether or not, if they're operating in the manner that they're supposed to, are we actually getting a return on our investment that's worth continuing?
Question.
My name's Ken. The example you gave in Lawton, where people were going to give $1,000 a piece. Now that's quid pro quo, right? Although I agree it's probably not provable, but the neighbor, that's bribery if people try to do it.
Let me tell you, before I ran for county commissioner, I read a book called Bad Times for Good Old Boys, and they talked about kickbacks and bribes and how the system worked. I will tell you, and I've said this on many occasions, we've now changed that. Instead of kickbacks and bribes, we now call them campaign contributions. And let me tell you why I say that. Go through and look, that we had a state senator that raised $265,000 during a 4-year period from his last election, and spent all $265,000 and did not have a race. You look, he paid for vehicles, he paid for virtually a couple of meals every day while he's up here at the Capitol getting paid by the state for meals and everything else. Now, luckily, he got beat in the last election, and just so happens you probably know who he is because he got indicted down in Mississippi. But this is what you follow. You go back and look at that, and you realize, a good example is Carol Fisher. If Carol Fisher, he got convicted of taking $1,000 check from somebody and stuck it in his personal account. If he had taken that check and put it in his campaign fund, and then wrote a check out of his campaign fund for expenses, he would have not been convicted. And I will tell you that if you look and see, there are many people that are subsidizing their income out of their campaign funds. We have a law, we changed the law now. It used to, if you had anything over $50 you had to report, you don't have to report anything, items under $1,000 you don't have to even report. And you can have,
Report just the
you
total.
wrote it as total, but you could have multiple items under $1,000, like one of them had $6,000 of under $1,000 listed as one lump sum. We don't even call them, make them spend that. So that's what I'm saying, is if we allow them to spend their campaign funds that way, then yeah, I think that would qualify as a bribe.
We have a sitting state senator right now, and I believe I looked at his report in the first quarter of this year, and he spent $33,000. There's no campaigns going on in the first quarter of this year. $33,000, and it was all in campaign expenses under $1,000, so it's lumped together. And so someone ought to call Senator Johnson and ask him, what did he really spend all that money on?
I'm glad you bring that name up because that same senator is taking trips all over the world, Now, he just happens to be my state senator now in the district that I live in. He's taking trips all over the world. I know he's an attorney by trade. I would like to know how you actually practice being a lawyer and doing all this stuff and taking all these trips. But when you're using that money as your own personal gain, I'm not accusing him of doing anything. I just would like an answer to that. How do you actually do all that? And are those trips being paid from those campaign contributions into his account? Question. Anybody have any questions? Now here's what we got to be as a people. This is what I'm going to say. We got to. Yeah, I think this is kind of the theme we got to get here. Okay, we've got to have enough courage to stand up against some of this kind of stuff, and it's got to stop because it's killing America. It's killing Oklahoma for sure, but it's killing America. Whenever we talk about us being conservatives in Oklahoma, Republican conservatives in Oklahoma, we allow this nonsense to go on here. We're nothing different than the Democrats in Washington, D.C., that's doing the same kind of thing. And this stuff's got to stop. That's why I say there's a big battle going on now in the country within the Republican Party. Because I do not believe this is what the Founding Fathers had in mind. Because George Washington even was on the position, he didn't believe in the political parties. He said it's going to do just exactly what's happening now in the country. So if we're going to be Republicans, let's stick to the platform of good government. Honest government that represents we the people, not special interest groups. That's my little statement.
And let me just mention something before Joe asks his question. That is, you can't I don't want to get rid of all tax credits. We have to differentiate. There's tax credits for your children and things like that. Those are not special interests. It's anybody that's got a child gets them. One that the only corporate tax credit I guess I've ever voted for is the deep well drilling. And you could say, well, why in the world would you vote for that? It's because we will refuse to reduce the taxes on the revenue of deep well drilling, which is the proper way to do it. And it's not called a tax credit, but they won't reduce the taxes because then it takes a vote of the people to increase them back up. So the way they skirt the issue, we'll give a tax credit.
Question.
My name's Joe again. Just for our general information, I've been looking through the internet here while we're talking, and there's a prowlingowl.com. Very good on this. And Mike, I give you credit, your name figures prominently as trying to investigate this, and Gary, yours does too. But let me list here just some of the companies who've gotten some questionable tax credits. Chaparral Energy, Scissortail, as you mentioned, Metafund, Rocket Plane, remember that great Rocket Plane outfit? We gave them $17 million and they sold 15 million credits to raise money. Great Plains Airlines, Weyerhaeuser, Oak Hills, Avondale Investment, Foxborough, WPG Investments, and Barry Switzer.
Don't talk about it too much now. He's gonna come down here next week.
Let me go back to someone asked me, said, you're going to be term limited, I'm going to be term limited this next election because they may come after me and give me B, but you know, if I get another term, people say, well, what are you going to do after that? What I plan on doing after that, and maybe in my spare time along the way, is I plan on trying to help write a new ethics law in the state of Oklahoma that is more clear and concise than any in the nation, and then go out by initiative petition and get it passed. I think that's the number one thing.
I need to say something real important, and that's, I went to my orthopedic surgeon yesterday. That's not real important, but I was visiting with him because he received tax credits, and that's all right. And he's good friends with Barry Switzer, and I wasn't going to mention that today. And unfortunately, Joe did, because I know Barry's coming next week. And I said something to him.
Well, he was coming.
He was coming. So here's the deal. Here's the deal, and I'm going to ask if someone else doesn't beat me to it next week. I'm going to find out. In fact, I'm going to look at the election records. My surgeon, I said something about Barry being a Democrat and being behind some of these tax credits, and he said he's not a Democrat anymore, he's a Republican. I'll check the election records and see if that's right. I've been asked for years about Barry Switzer's participation in these programs, because I know I'm familiar with it. But he wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't doing anything illegal. It's stuff that I don't like, and I try to bring it into it. But I'll take tax credits too, if they're legal. So I hope we contain the conversation next week to OSSAA, and we don't get down on anybody on a different issue.
And again, and I'll say from this microphone, and I think Sharon Freedy asked the question, is I don't think that I would be for all, against every tax credit. I just would like to be able to be accountable, for these tax, and actually know, and where they wouldn't be transferred to other people for their own benefit and gains and those kinds of, that's all I'm asking for.
Well, and the thing about it is if we did away with the ones that don't generate something, then we have more resources to go back and look and see what's necessary to help generate something. You know, but every single, not only every single category of credit, but every single credit ought to be able to stand on its own. You know, but we have to know that before we know that.
Well, it's to me, it's a certain way like writing off certain items we have in our income tax. We can write off our interest rate on the homes we buy. I think that's a good thing. Or tithing, we can write that kind of stuff. Those are good things. And again, that's all I'm trying to say is we need to have a more open government, and we the people need to be able to be where we can see the accountability where these tax credits are being done, where they're not being hidden out somewhere where nobody knows.
Let me just mention one other thing also, you guys have a question about. That is, I believe it's Great Plains Airlines, and I think I can say it whether it was or not because I think they're out of business. But I believe it was Great Plains Airlines that got massive amounts of tax credits. And about 3, 4, 5 years ago, they filed for bankruptcy. And then the bankruptcy was put on hold for 2 years. Anybody want to guess why?
Tax credit.
Because if they went out of business before the date the bankruptcy was held, they would have had to go back and get all the tax credits back from the people they'd given them to. So the bankruptcy was strictly put on hold, waiting for the 5-year deadline to expire, and then refiled with no intervening action other than now the tax credits couldn't be recovered.
Question.
I'm Don, and I've got a personal question that I'm looking for an answer for. It sounds to me like that the only problem with tax credits is that they can be transferred.
No. That is a major problem, but another problem with them is that they have been handled so loosely that people will fill out the paperwork to say that they're going to get them and they'll qualify for them, but nobody's following through to see if they actually did what they were supposed to do. So they may be getting these credits and have done nothing more than shuffle paper.
Okay, but if they do go ahead and transfer those credits, don't they make money off of that? Isn't that profit?
Yeah, I mean, if they get a credit that's transferable, they can sell that.
That money belongs to the people, not, it shouldn't, people's money shouldn't be spent that way. We should be able to add more to our tax base instead of those people.
Okay, last question.
Maybe what he was getting at was if they weren't transferable, somebody got a tax credit for, let's say, 10 million, but they really weren't a going business, they would never have taxes because they wouldn't have had an income. You'd have those sitting there, you'd worry about them, but they'd never, ever actually get used if they couldn't sell them to somebody
Right.
else.
Well, and the other thing too is if the company was doing something, actually generating something, and they got a $10 million tax credit, but they didn't have a $10 million tax liability, so they settled on 50 cents on the dollar and get $5 million, somebody got $5 million for doing nothing but buying the tax credit.
Gary, thanks very much for coming. And again, now, if you're in here and you're confused, don't worry so much about that. I mean, because some of this is very confusing, and it's supposed to be confusing, because once you figure it out, you're probably not gonna be for it in your government. There's a reason for that. It's called loophole. Again, next week, see you all down here next week. We've got another program next week, and hope to see you here. Talk to you later. See you.
Well, that was fun.